Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the PC-6, a rather unique short takeoff and landing plane. We'll go ahead and go through the basics of getting this sucker started, some of the kind of tips that I found from flying it around quite a bit, as well as just kind of a general experience of this airplane. So right now we're here at 6:30 in the morning. This is a good speed. It's a pretty neat little airport. The reason I chose this particular airport, look at that gorgeous full moon by the way, is because this thing is in such a weird little spot, and it's also a super short runway so we can test things out properly. So let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, climbing into this thing, you realize its heritage pretty much right away. This is definitely an older airplane for sure. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go flip on my little headlamp here. I can see a little bit better this way. And we can take a look at this thing. This is what I consider to be sparse. Look down on the floor. There's a little tiny seat in case anybody wants to sit there. And my back seat consists of basically an empty spot. Again, not a lot going on in a plane this small, which is, like I said, gets such a little kick out of it. Got a little ceiling light above our heads. We have our classic little thing if we want to go ahead and adjust some of our aileron trim. Again, everything's pretty much there. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get some electrical power into this plane in order to kind of get things rolling here. So to do that, we're going to come swing over here, and you have two different switches. You have the master switch on the left, and then you have the battery switch. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this one on. Go ahead and pop this one on as well. Now there are two different settings for the battery. There's the exterior power, which is the middle setting, and then there's the straight up battery switch, which is pushed all the way up top. Now you're going to do that about 100 times too. So I'm going to go ahead and stick it in the exterior power position. External rather, not exterior. I'm going to reach above my head again, just turn some lights on to make it a little bit easier to see today. And we can go ahead and flip that sucker on. Other light switches, of course, are right over here. So I'm going to go ahead and flip on the cabin lights. I'm going to flip on the instrument lights as well. And you know, it's a pretty chilly morning, so I'm not going to bother with the other lights there. Next, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and flip on the navigation lights, which is going to kind of let everybody know. And of course, we need the bacon light to sort of give everybody heads up. Now look at the size of the tail on this airplane. Holy smokes. You'd think this would be the twin engine plane with something that big. So that's all set and we're ready to go. These are all our landing lights. We'll deal with these a little later on. Unfortunately, we do not have the ability to actually shut down our rate. Actually, it does. Okay. That was being a little weird before. Nope. Unfortunately, that switch is still... It reminds me of that pointless switch where you push the button down and it comes back on. You know what? You enjoy yourself, Mr. Switch. You enjoy. Next thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to confirm my park and brake is set. It's this little metal piece of thing. Just sort of pull it all the way out. Stabilizer trim is going to look pretty good. I'm going to confirm that by looking over on this side. Stabilizer trim, we want to make sure it is inside of the green. Now, of course, we always want to make sure our trim is set properly, but this aircraft apparently is extra special that we make sure that we keep the trim set correctly. Otherwise, we're going to have issues. We'll go ahead and zing around and make sure all of our instruments is set up the correct way that we want them to be. We'll deal with these two instruments in just a minute. Next, what I want to do is I'm going to confirm that my igniter selector switch is set to the middle position, which is the both position. When we do start this thing, we can start on one or the other, kind of like an airliner can, but in this case, we're going to set that to the both position. Next, what I'm going to do is down here on the floor, there's this gorgeous little thing that's our fuel system valve. You click it like that, it sets it to the closed position. You click it again, it sets it to the open position. We want to make sure at this time that it is pointing to kind of horizontally here. Give everybody a little punch. Yeah, it feels pretty good there. There's my rudder adjustment valve. Can't do much about that right now. I'm actually going to go ahead and flip off that. I think it worked pretty well for me so far, so I'm not going to stress too much here. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the sucker started. So we're going to go take a look around the aircraft to make sure nothing annoying is going to get in our way here. Don't mind a little bit of chop. Thank you for this great airplane, but also thank you for bringing back the chop. You know how it goes. Normally in the real world, of course, you could sit here and you could test all your individual lights to make sure that they work properly. But in this particular case, I'm not going to worry about it too much. So what do we need to do here? Well, first things first, we need to determine what the outside air temperature is. Taking a look over here on my side, I can see that we are well past minus 10 here, or 10 degrees. 10 degrees over here, we're about 15 right now, which means we can go ahead and put our blue handle, which is our propeller handle, all the way into the forward position. Next, what we're going to do, we're going to make sure our engine is in the cutoff position, which is all the way backwards. With that all set, it's just a matter of getting everything started. So for some reason, the guy before us left the ignition switch on, which I think is a little bit sloppy. Starting this thing is a breeze. I'm going to turn on the booster pump, turn on the ignition, look out the window, make sure I'm not going to chop anybody up, who I do like. Flip the starter, and while we wait. So, how you doing? What we're looking for is right up here. We're hoping to get to about 12 to 14%. You can see our propeller itself is spinning right up. We can see it hits that magical 12%. We go ahead and go click, snap that to the low idle position. Give it just a moment. You're going to get a bunch of angry switches and things like that are going to be coming on all over the place. And immediately what the aircraft will do is it will catch. Now, of course, you're sitting here going, why is it not catching? 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 Now notice I had to put the fuel into the vertical position, which is interesting because if you take a look at the fuel gauge itself, you will notice that this is pointing towards the word closed. It is not pointing towards the word open. Also, you do not need to be on high idle. You can be on low idle here. This is just a little kind of a psych out thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the engine to spin up here. Again, this is a classic old school turboprop. So it's going to take a few minutes to get that thing up to a reasonable RPM. Again, we'll let the starter run for a little while. Once we get over 40%, you can actually disengage the starter. The book says 51%, so we can go ahead and give it a little bit of time. Notice the starter light just came out. I can go ahead and click that to the off position. Perfect. Now I can come over here and you can actually disable ignition. Now a lot of times you leave ignition turned on when you're doing takeoffs and landings in case, of course, your engine cuts out on you. But for this, we can go ahead and pop that sucker off. Booster pump, we can go ahead and leave on through takeoff. We can pop that one off during cruise if we need to do it. Now what we would do, of course, is we come over here and we'd play the master switch game with the radio switch. Okay, fine, be that way. And then we go ahead and pop on. I told you we'd do that a few times. We go ahead and pop on the generator switch. Generator switch is working. If you can take a look at my reversed facing amps lights, we'll go ahead and point that this is pointing now in the correct direction. Now, there's a couple weird things with this aircraft that I always find kind of quirky, which I really get a kick out of here. The least of which I notice is that we have our oil temperature, oil pressure. What you're going to notice is this oil temperature actually is controllable by having this oil cooler here. So one of the things you need to kind of monitor during flying this thing is just how hot the oil is. Think of it as a cow flap kind of a thing. Now that the engine is running, we're going to go ahead and press the Alt button, which is going to go flip on our transponder to let everybody around us know where we are. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my little V-lock here. I'm going to press the CDI button to lock it into my GPS. Now, one of the things they did not fix is we saw this fake waypoint right here, which is basically hijacking my process here. So unfortunately, I can't make that go away directly. If I could, I'd just come down here, do one of these direct, press the enter button, and of course that's not going to work because, like I was saying before, it's not something you can immediately get rid of quickly or easily. One cool thing while we're warming up here is I have this really, really neat instrument down here that basically acts as kind of an all-in-all, basically kind of fuel monitor here. In this particular gauge, it tells you your fuel flow. This one tells you how much you have left. This one tells you how much you've used. This is how much time before your engine shuts off, and that is the current fuel pressure. This is actually kind of a neat little trick here. Now, another thing, too, when I'm talking about engine instruments, swinging to this side, these are your actual fuel quantity gauges. Notice I've got absolutely no suction here at all. It doesn't suck. I'm confused. So coming down here also, we have these two. We want to go ahead and pull this thing out real quick. This is going to cage everybody, make sure it's in great shape. Taking one last quick little peek at the little checklist to make sure I haven't missed anything important here. Nope, everything seems to be in great shape. So now one of the cool things with this aircraft is this is a tail-dragging aircraft. But that wheel back there actually will caster if you kick it hard enough. At least that's what the manual says that it does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop on what I call my version of the taxi lights, which are going to be the inside two position lights on here. Now you're not even going to be able to see these darn things because you have to click these two switches too. Now watch this. See them? Haha! Now they pop out so you can actually take a peek at them. All right, let's do it to it. I'm going to go ahead and release the parking brake. I'm going to go ahead and put the idle up to high idle. Now, in a turboprop, when you pop it into high idle, what's going to happen is the aircraft is going to start picking up speed because you're basically twisting the blades a little bit, so it's biting a little bit more air. It's also going to increase your RPM just a teeny tiny bit. Now, this aircraft does not take much to get going. This is a very, very short takeoff kind of an airplane, so it does not take much. So we're going to drag ourselves right on over to the runway. One of the things you can do in the real world at this airport, and we're going to do right here, is we're actually going to go right across the grass. And you can actually see where a bunch of people have already done that because they know that the secret to this runway is not actually going to the runway properly. On our way to the taxiway, or I should say on the taxiway, we're going to go ahead and pop down our first notch of flaps, and that's going to get us to our takeoff position. Now, this aircraft has an interesting little quirk as far as getting ourselves airborne here. Let me go ahead and make sure I have as much runway in front of me as possible. The first one is you want to make sure you're using the proper flaps setting. Right now, I've gone ahead and put it to the middle flaps. If you look at the back, you can see these things are dipping down pretty hard. Come down here, give everybody a quick little wiggle. You can see that everything's working perfectly fine in that regard. Give the stick a shake. Looking good, looking good, looking good. Awesome. Next thing you want to do is when we do accelerate, you want to make sure you come up to power before you release the brakes. This aircraft is, like I said, a short takeoff and landing. The sock, by the way, is a variable. Don't mind the fact that it's facing away from us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hold down on the brake. I'm going to go ahead and push the throttle almost all the way forward. It's going to be about 85%. The engine, of course, is going to spin up immediately. And we're looking to use about 47.3, I think is the maximum. But it doesn't take much. So now all we have to do is keep this aircraft as nice and balanced. The tail will come off the ground. And we pull back just ever so slightly. right about 56, 60 knots. This thing's going to come up in the air, and then we're looking to go to about 65 knots is considered our basically our VX here. And we're going to just hold that gently until we can get ourselves clear of some of these nasty trees that are directly below us. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were sitting in the back seat, I'd be freaking out just a teeny tiny bit as we make our little climb out here. Notice we're getting 1,000 feet per minute at 65 knots. This is a very, 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 very high-performance aircraft in that regard. And that's what I think is just so slick about this. You know, you can take this thing to the middle of the mountains and not have to worry anything about it. All right, we've got about 500 feet underneath me. I'm going to let my nose come down just a tiny bit. I'm going to get up to the green, bring up that notch of flaps, and you can see the lovely Connecticut River. Again, this is a little bit early in the morning here, so we can't see too much. And we're making our way over to Elizabeth Field, which is this teeny tiny runway right off the coast here. So now this aircraft climbs at about 97 knots. Is going to get you pretty much the quickest climb. The way I always think about it is if you think about the white zone of our little airspeed indicator, I'll zoom in on that for you. If you basically park this thing right there, you're going to get this aircraft going up about as fast as it can. The book says we're allowed to use a full takeoff power at all times if we want to, but the problem is when we start cruising in just a minute, you're going to realize it's not an acceptable option. So we're cruising perfect right about at our VY there. Let's bring it over on this side. We're just going to take a peek at the oil temperature. I think the oil temperature is actually still pretty good. It's pretty good. I'll go ahead and pop off my landing lights now. Don't need those on right now. And we get to see an absolutely gorgeous little sunset just kind of peeking its way out of there. And looking over the nose right now, I can already see my destination. Now, once you get this aircraft up in the air, it pretty much flies itself. It's a pretty stable aircraft. There is no automatic pilot in the cargo version of this. We'll save a separate video for that other aircraft, you know, the one with the G1000 that does everything for you. This one, like I said, there's really not a lot going on in the back seat of this thing, so unfortunately it's just us. So let's go ahead and fast forward time just a teeny tiny bit. What? Thank you, Mr. Sunshine. You're very helpful. And we'll bring ourselves up to about 2,000 feet. Now, the next quirk on this aircraft is cruising with it. So we'll go ahead and get ourselves just a tiny bit higher. I'm going to go ahead and push that nose right down. It's about 2,000 feet, a little tiny bit over. I'm not too annoyed about that. Now, this aircraft cruises at 119 knots. Now, I know that sounds weird, but basically what you do is you pull the throttle back until your airspeed indicator on the left-hand side indicates 119. Once you've got it at that position, congratulations, you found the cruise power. One of the things I found interesting is when I was doing some research on this airplane, was trying to find what the cruise tables and what the cruise charts actually look like. The other thing I found out from doing some research on that is the fact that this particular aircraft, you can cruise at basically full RPM at all times if you want. The only advantage really to taking the RPM down a little bit would make things a little tiny bit quieter. Again, it depends on what kind of cruise you're doing. In general, I never touch the RPM handle on this thing. As a matter of fact, just as demonstration purposes here, if I were to quickly grab onto that RPM handle and pull it back halfway, notice it knocks about 50 RPM off the engine itself. So it really doesn't make that much of a difference. It's really more for feathering purposes. All right, I'm going to pull that throttle back just a tiny bit. I'm going to go ahead and set my trim. All right, trim's looking pretty good. Let me go ahead and adjust that sun so it's not quite as blinding. Thank you, Mr. Sun. You're very helpful. It's a good thing we'd spent some time circling in the air to go ahead and burn some fuel off. Give this thing just a couple taps of trim, and you can see I'm doing about 123. My total pressure here, as far as my torque goes, doing about 32, 33, 34. Somewhere in there is usually pretty good. Keep in mind this aircraft is rated to go over 20,000 feet. So if you do choose to go that high, keep in mind you're going to have to progressively push the throttle forward in order to produce enough power that's going to be able to kind of get you going up. Okay, now that we're on our way, and we'll be there in just a few minutes, the next thing I want to take a look at is I want to go ahead and take a look at some of our instrumentation here. Now we're cruising. I can go ahead and pop off the booster pump. Nothing's going to happen. The engine's not going to cut out on me or anything annoying like that. The reason we do that, of course, is, again, we only really need the thing during takeoff and landing, and again, that's a backup system. The turboprop itself has a pretty strong pump on its own. Now, the modern version, interestingly enough, has two different settings. Again, I say modern. I see the passenger version that we have in Flight Sim has two different settings. One's a cruise pump, and the other one is basically a starter pump, which I find very interesting. Okay, so other things we need to think about. Now that we're cruising, like I said, we'll take a peek at the oil temperature. Oil temperature is delightful. I'm not going to have to touch that handle. If it was like 110 outside or something along those lines, then we'd have to worry about it. Next thing I want to keep an eye on is that we have these lovely two instruments. These things tend to kind of wander every once in a while, so kind of keep an eye on them. Sometimes you're going to have to go ahead and cage them. You can see I've already had to make a quick little adjustment to my directional gyro. It started drifting pretty quick there. Next thing we want to keep an eye on is if we come down here, you can see exactly how much fuel you're using at any given time. One of the things I get a kick out of is how much we have remaining, even though it says... I don't know why, I just find that funny. We also have time to empty. You can see at our current cruise power, we have about 3 hours and 45 minutes before we run out of fuel here. All right, our destination is right off our nose. Like I said, it's Elizabeth Field. It's this little teeny tiny runway. Landing this plane is relatively straightforward. Again, there's nothing too crazy about the approach on this one. Basically, you're going to take it down to about 65, 70 knots, and you're going to keep it pretty stable. You can do 2-point landings where you're going to land on the 2 tires. You could also do a 3-point landing. This aircraft doesn't have a crazy amount of angle to it, so if you are going to opt for the 3-point landing, don't be surprised if the plane kind of goes beep and clunk and sort of just dumps you down on the ground with a nice loud thud. That's just kind of the nature of this particular plane. Another thing you want to watch out for is because of the way the flaps are designed on this thing, when you start to slow down, this aircraft just drops. It gets what my flight instructor used to call very, very sinky. It's not like Helsinki. It's just sinky, and you'll see exactly what I mean once we get into position here. So what I'm going to do now is, now that we got everything all set up for our cruise, is I'm going to line ourselves up with the landing. Alrighty, we're just coming around right now, getting ourselves set up for a landing. You can see Elizabeth Field is not a terribly large runway there. One thing we are going to do when we come in, we're going to make sure we go ahead and flip on the booster pump. That's right out of the manual. We want to make sure that option is selected. Now, the approach speed on this aircraft is considered to be 68 knots, and we're also expected to go ahead and use full flaps if we want to do a minimum distance landing. Take a look at the book real quickly here. Given our current temperatures, let's see here, 47, landing at about 315 meters is the expected landing distance. So definitely not a very long run. One problem you got to watch out for this plane, and this is just like the passenger version of this one, is when you're coming in for a landing, like I said, those flaps really make you get a little on the sinky side, which is what they're there for. But the other thing you got to watch out for is, remember, we're at turboprop, so when you pull that throttle back, this airplane's going to want to stop flying. So it's a kind of a bit of a surprise for some folks. Getting to the end there. And by the way, every airport is right next to the graveyard. That's just basically a standard rule. All right, we're down at a good speed. I'm going to go ahead and pop down my flaps. Get ourselves going down about 500 feet per minute is pretty safe. And like I said, we're looking for 68 knots calibrated airspeed is what the book says. And that's at max gross, which we are definitely not at right now. We're significantly light. As a matter of fact, I'm showing 60 knots, and this thing is not complaining very much, which is pretty impressive. There we go, about 70 right there. At about 500 feet per minute. We're going to be hitting our turning point. This aircraft benefits for sure from going right from downwind to final, especially if you're this close like I am. So I'm going to come spinning around here. You want to be kind of cautious popping down that last notch of flaps, because at the moment you do that, like I said, the plane's going to get very slow. Take a look out the window here. They're going to get us for that landing fee again, which is a shame because they really hose you on this island. Next notch of flaps. Looks good. I'm going to go ahead and spin us around. Now, this aircraft does have the ability to go in reverse, but you're going to have to bind a separate key to that to basically activate the reversing process. Personally, I don't think we need reverse here because we're going to be able to get on the ground perfectly safe. All right, we're doing about 65. We're looking for about 68, so we're quite slow, but again, we are also significantly lighter than the book is calling for. Now, when I would see that runway in the real world, I'd panic just a tiny bit, realizing just how short that runway is. But I'm not too worried about it. Like I said, we only need about 900 feet over a 50-foot obstacle to safely get this thing on the ground. And we have the advantage of a headwind right now, so I'm not complaining. Of course, that headwind is a cross headwind, but, you can't win them all, right? Lights say I'm high. I'm going to let the nose come down a little bit more. And I think those lights are in the wrong position. That's not actually where they are in the real runway, but I'll take it. Okay, we have a choice between a 2-pointer and a 3-pointer. I'm going to make sure this is nice and short, so I'll go for the 3-pointer. Hold the nose off. Now, when you kill the power on this thing, it has a little bit of drift on it. Power's out. Nose is up. There we are, and we are on the ground. And perfect. Barely even took up half the runway. Not bad. Not bad at all. One thing I should have done before landing, though, of course, is flipped on my landing lights just to improve visibility here. One of the things I like is how fast this thing spins around on the ground. I just jam basically on the right rudder pedal. You can see the thing comes right around and actually starts free casting after a certain point. One thing we do want to watch out for is that we don't actually break off the wheel here. So this is pretty much all there is to flying this aircraft. Again, the big things you want to watch out for is make sure, remember, you're a turboprop. You have a limit as far as how hard you can push it. Other things you want to consider is this thing does land well. It's just a matter of keeping your speed right around 68. You want to climb initially at about 65. And when, of course, you want to get to your VY, you want to make sure you climb at right around 77 is what it says. I'm sorry, 97. And when you cruise, just make sure you don't go into the yellow arc here, which means pretty much keeping your aircraft at exactly 119.9 knots, which works out to be about 32 as far as PSI for torque goes. So hopefully this video helps folks out. Next time we'll take a look at the not the civilian version, I should say, or those are all civilian versions, although there is a military version of this out there. We'll go ahead and take a look at the cargo version. Enjoy.